Could a single kiss ignite a Mafia Don's obsession? She only meant to save herself from humiliation, but that one impulsive act set off a chain of events she could never escape. What began as defiance became her undoing, a dangerous claim that blurred the line between love and control, passion and peril. In his world, power demands loyalty, but her world? It demands freedom. When desire turns to danger, and art becomes the language of survival, how far will she go to protect her heart and her soul? This is a love story written in fire and obsession. Don't blink. Don't look away. Every second will pull you deeper into the storm. Watch till the end to witness the moment defiance turns into destiny. And if you love stories of passion, danger, and power, hit subscribe and step into a world where one kiss can change everything. The ballroom glittered like a dream made of glass and gold. Every chandelier sparkled. Every laugh floated through the air like champagne bubbles. Waiters in crisp white shirts weaved between guests carrying trays of crystal glasses, their movements rehearsed and graceful. The music, a slow, elegant waltz, filled the space with luxury and restraint. And right in the middle of all that, Nkei felt like an imposter. Her gown, a simple black dress she had borrowed from a friend, was elegant but plain compared to the glittering fabrics around her. Diamonds flashed on wrists and necks. Laughter came easily to people who had never had to count coins or paint until dawn to pay rent. Nkei stood near one of the tall windows, holding a glass of water and pretending to admire the city lights. Inside, her stomach twisted with nerves. She didn't belong here, but she had to be here. The gallery that sponsored her upcoming exhibition had begged her to attend. A great networking opportunity, they'd said. Make the right connections, and your art could finally reach the right eyes. Still, she hated the way people looked at her, as though she were part of the decoration, or worse, a curiosity. She wasn't one of them. She didn't speak their language of money and subtle power. She painted emotion, pain, and beauty, but none of that mattered here. Then she saw him. Across the room, Seo-jun, the man whispered about in half the city, stood surrounded by people who seemed to orbit him like planets. His dark suit fit perfectly, his posture calm and commanding. There was something magnetic about him, something that made others pause mid-conversation just to steal a glance. And Kay had heard stories about him. They called him the Don. Some said he controlled half the art market in Seoul, buying, selling, and influencing what collectors valued. Others hinted at darker dealings, illegal trades, quiet threats, and disappearances of those who crossed him. Their eyes met just for a moment. It was enough. And Kay's breath caught. There was something sharp in his gaze, like he could see through her pretense and straight into her thoughts. She looked away quickly, pretending to sip her water, but her heart beat faster. She didn't realize that glance had already drawn invisible lines between them. As she tried to fade back into the crowd, a tall man with silver hair and a smirk approached her. His voice was smooth, but there was arrogance beneath it. "You must be the young artist everyone's whispering about," he said, swirling his drink. And Kay nodded politely, though she had no idea who he was. "I'm just here to observe," she replied softly. "Ah," he said, stepping closer. "An observer. How poetic. But I've seen your paintings.
You pour too much of yourself into them."
"That can be dangerous in this business." She frowned, unsure how to respond. His eyes lingered on her longer than was comfortable, and the tone of his smile shifted. Less friendly, more predatory. He glanced towards Seo-jun, who was now watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. The silver-haired man smirked again. "You should be careful whose attention you attract," he said quietly. "Some people here don't take kindly to surprises." Something in his tone made Nkei's stomach tighten. She stepped back, murmuring an excuse, but he caught her wrist, lightly, yet firmly. "Don't run away," he said in a mocking whisper. "We're just talking." Nkei's pulse quickened. Around them, people were laughing and toasting, oblivious to her discomfort. She looked towards Seo-jun again. He was still watching. For a split second, she saw something dangerous in his expression, not anger, but warning. Then the man gripping her wrist leaned closer. "You think you're special because the Don looked at you?" he sneered softly. "You're not his type. You're just." And Kay didn't let him finish. A flash of defiance surged through her veins. Maybe it was fear, maybe pride, or maybe it was the exhaustion of always feeling small in rooms like this. Before she could think, she pulled away, took 3 quick steps, and did something that stunned the entire ballroom. She kissed Seo-jun.
It was instinct.
It was desperation. It was madness. For one heartbeat, everything stopped. The music, the chatter, the laughter, all silenced under the weight of her impulsive act. Her hand trembled slightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. Seo-jun didn't move. His eyes widened, surprise flashing across his otherwise controlled face. Then came the whispers. What, did you see that? Did she just? With the dawn, the room filled with gasps, like ripples spreading across still water. And Kay stepped back, breathless, her cheeks burning. She couldn't explain why she did it. Maybe she thought it would distract everyone from the awkward confrontation. Maybe she just wanted to survive the night with her dignity intact. Seo-jun blinked once, slowly, studying her. A dangerous sort of amusement curved his lips. Interesting, he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. And Kay's chest tightened. She didn't wait to see his reaction. She turned and hurried out of the ballroom, her heels echoing against marble floors as she fled past bewildered guests. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a wave. Her breath came in sharp bursts. The city lights blurred as she walked faster, gripping her small clutch to her chest. What had she done? She replayed the moment again and again in her mind. The shock in his eyes, the murmurs of the crowd, the humiliation that would surely follow. Tomorrow, everyone in that world would know her name for the wrong reasons. But beneath the panic, something else stirred. Excitement.
Fear.
And something darker. In that instant, she hadn't been invisible. She reached her small apartment past midnight, her pulse still racing. She locked the door, kicked off her shoes, and sank into a chair. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, flushed, wild-eyed, alive. This can't get worse, she whispered. But she was wrong. The next morning, her phone buzzed with messages from people she barely knew. Gallery owners, journalists, even an art critic who had ignored her for years. Everyone wanted to talk about the mysterious artist who had kissed the dawn at the gala. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests. Her name was suddenly everywhere. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was something else. A single, unmarked envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a black card, embossed with gold letters. You owe me a proper introduction. It was signed only, S. And Kay's fingers trembled as she read the note. The paper smelled faintly of his cologne. Rich, expensive, unmistakable. She stared at it for a long time, her heart pounding. Her impulsive act had saved her from humiliation that night. But as she held that card in her hands, Kay realized it had also marked the beginning of something far more dangerous. In that one reckless moment of defiance, she had stepped into Seo-jun's world. A world of power, control, and secrets. And there would be no turning back. The morning after the gala felt unreal. Kay woke up to a stream of messages on her phone. Notifications, missed calls, emails, and unread texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Her name was trending on social media. People were calling her the bold artist who kissed the dawn. At first, she thought it was a cruel joke. But as she scrolled through the articles, her hands began to tremble. There it was, her photo, taken at the exact moment she leaned in and kissed Seo-jun. The flash of the cameras had captured the disbelief in his eyes and the fierce, desperate look in hers. The caption read, "Unknown artist shocks elite gala with scandalous act. The dawn remains silent." Her heart raced. She shut her phone off and buried it under a pillow. It felt like her entire world had tilted overnight. For 2 days, she didn't leave her small studio apartment. She painted, trying to drown out the noise. The rhythmic brushstrokes calmed her, but every color she laid down seemed to echo his name. She could still feel his heartbeat against her palm from that night, steady and unreadable. Then, on the 3rd day, a box arrived at her door. It was large, wrapped in matte black paper with a single white ribbon. No card. No name. She hesitated before untying it. Inside was a pristine set of imported oil paints, brands she could never afford, along with a note written in sharp, elegant handwriting. You paint emotions beautifully, but I wonder what you'd create if you stopped hiding them. No signature, but NK didn't need one. Her pulse quickened as she stared at the note. It smelled faintly familiar, sandalwood and smoke.
Seojun.
The next day, another package came. Then another. Expensive brushes. Handmade canvases. Fresh orchids that filled her room with their subtle, haunting scent. At first, she told herself they were coincidences. Maybe her gallery had sent them, riding the wave of sudden publicity. But when she received a plain envelope with only one sentence, "Your silence is louder than any painting," she knew it wasn't the gallery. Still, she said nothing. She kept painting. But now, her paintings were different. The colors bled together with reckless emotion. Deep reds, smoky grays, the faint glimmer of gold. Her work felt alive in a way it never had before, like her hands were channeling something she didn't fully understand. Then the whispers began. At an art cafe one afternoon, NK overheard two gallery owners talking. She's suddenly on everyone's radar. One said, "Collectors are calling. They want her work. Because of the dawn." The other replied quietly, "He's talking about her. People say he's interested." NK froze. That word, interested, carried a dangerous kind of weight when it came to Seojun. She didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified. That evening, her phone lit up again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "Stop hiding behind the paint. I'd rather see the artist." No name. Just that. She stared at the message for a long time, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her instinct told her to ignore it. Her curiosity told her not to. She typed back, "Who is this?" A full minute passed. Then another. "You already know." Her heart skipped. For a moment, she considered deleting the message, pretending it never happened. But before she could decide, someone knocked on her door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. She hesitated, fear tightening her chest. When she opened the door, she froze. Seojun stood there. He wasn't dressed like the polished Don from the gala. He wore a dark coat, his collar up and his hair slightly tousled, as though he'd come straight from the rain. But the same quiet power radiated from him, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Are you going to invite me in?" he asked finally, his tone calm, almost gentle. NK stepped aside slowly. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He walked in, scanning the small studio apartment. Canvases leaned against the walls, brushes and paints scattered across the table. The scent of turpentine mixed with orchids. His gaze lingered on a half-finished painting, abstract, chaotic, full of motion and color. "You've been busy," he said, his voice quiet. NK crossed her arms. "You've been watching me." He turned, one brow lifting. "Watching is a strong word. I prefer paying attention." She swallowed. "Why?" He took a slow step closer. "You kiss me." Her cheeks burned. "That was an accident. A mistake." Was it? His tone was unreadable. "Because ever since that night, you've been in every conversation I've had. Everyone wants to know who you are, what you are. And I realized," he leaned slightly closer, "I didn't know either." And Kay forced herself to hold his gaze. "So what? You send gifts, and I'm supposed to be grateful?" "I don't expect gratitude," he said smoothly. "Only understanding." "Understanding what?" "That when I give attention, it means something." His eyes darkened, a shadow of something possessive flickering there. "You walked into my world the moment you kissed me, NK. You made a statement. Now the world is watching what I'll do next." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. "I don't want to be part of your world. You already are." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. NK took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't own me," she whispered. His jaw tightened. "I never said I did." He paused. "But people will think so. And in my world, perception is everything." She didn't understand what he meant until days later. That week, her gallery called. A major collector wanted to buy every painting she had ever made, sight unseen. Another exhibition offer came from a luxury venue that had rejected her twice before. Her inbox flooded again, but now the tone had changed. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was the Dawn's artist. Every success came with a shadow. People looked at her differently, some with admiration, others with jealousy or quiet fear. One evening, she returned to her studio to find a single crimson rose placed on her work table, resting against her newest painting. No note this time. She didn't need one. The next night, she dreamt of him, his calm voice, his steady gaze, his hand resting lightly against her cheek. She woke with a start, unsure whether she was afraid or yearning. The following afternoon, as sunlight streamed through her studio window, she picked up a blank canvas. She told herself she would paint something normal, something simple, a landscape, perhaps. But her hand refused. Her brush moved on its own, bold and furious. When she stepped back, her breath caught. It wasn't a landscape. It was him. His silhouette, painted in deep, shadowed strokes. His eyes hidden, his presence overwhelming. She dropped the brush, trembling. In that moment, Nkei realized the truth that had been slowly tightening around her since the gala. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't admiration. It was a claim. Seojun hadn't needed to say the words out loud. His actions, his presence, and even the world's sudden attention, all of it had become an unspoken chain linking her to him. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and confusion, a small, treacherous part of her didn't want to break free. Not yet. Nkei tried to stay away from Seojun. She told herself she would paint, work, and live quietly. No more messages, no more gifts, no more black envelopes at her door. But Seojun's shadow was everywhere, silent and deliberate, like smoke curling beneath a closed door. Every gallery that called her name now had his touch behind it. Every opportunity that came her way seemed to trace back to him. Even when he wasn't present, she could feel him, watching, waiting, shaping her path. At first, she resisted. She turned down invitations to the high-end exhibitions he sponsored. She ignored the luxurious car that appeared outside her apartment one evening, the driver saying only, "Mr. Seojun thought you might prefer to travel comfortably." But slowly, the resistance began to wear her down. Because with every refusal came a consequence she hadn't expected. Doors started closing. The same galleries that had begged for her work suddenly delayed payments, postponed shows, or stopped calling. Her name, once burning brightly, began to fade from the art scene as quickly as it had risen. And then, just when she thought she was free, Seojun appeared again. It happened at a private art auction held in a marble-lined hotel ballroom. Nkei had been invited by her gallery manager, who swore it was good for her career. The moment she walked in, she felt it, a familiar current in the air. And then she saw him. Seojun stood at the back of the room, hands in his pockets, talking to men in dark suits who clearly weren't just art lovers. His eyes met hers almost immediately, as if he had known the exact moment she'd walked in. "Miss Nkei," he greeted when she finally approached him, his tone smooth as silk. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I was," she replied honestly, her voice low. "Your world, it's not mine." He smiled faintly. "And yet here you are." His gaze drifted over the paintings being auctioned, but Nkei had the sense that he was still watching her from the corner of his eye. "You see, art is never just about beauty," he continued. "It's about value. And value is power. Tonight, every brushstroke is a conversation between money and influence." Nkei looked around. Wealthy collectors nodded subtly to one another. The bidding numbers being whispered didn't make sense. Millions for a single piece, exchanged not with excitement, but calculation. It was as if the paintings themselves were only excuses for something else, something unspoken. And then she saw a small, abstract piece that looked familiar. It was one of hers, though she'd sold it to a small collector months ago. "Why is my work here?" she asked sharply. Seojun's expression didn't change. "Because I brought it here." "You bought it back?" "I protect what belongs to me." Her breath caught. "I don't belong to you." He turned to her fully then, his gaze steady and unreadable. "No," he said softly. "Not yet." That night, she should have walked away. But something in his voice, something dark and magnetic, held her still. Over the next few weeks, their worlds intertwined again, as if by fate. Seojun began to appear at her exhibitions, quiet and watchful. He didn't interfere, but everyone noticed him. When he stood beside her, people treated her differently, with reverence, with fear. Sometimes, she caught glimpses of the world beneath his polished exterior. Meetings that looked like art deals but were really coded negotiations. Guests at his dinners who spoke in riddles, their laughter masking something sharper. Once, she overheard an argument in his office. Angry voices, the sound of glass shattering, then silence. When she looked at Seo-jun afterward, there wasn't a trace of emotion on his face. "You shouldn't be here for this part of my life," he told her quietly once as they left a meeting together. "Then why keep pulling me into it?" she asked. He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers briefly, a touch that felt like both a question and a claim. And Kay's art began to shift. The bright tones of her early work faded into shadows. Her new pieces were raw, powerful, filled with longing and conflict. Every painting carried traces of him, his calm, his danger, his control. Critics called her evolution fearless. They didn't know that each canvas was a battle between her freedom and the pull of a man she couldn't seem to escape. Sometimes, when Seo-jun came to her studio, he would stand in silence, watching her paint. "You paint like you're trying to exorcise me," he said once. "Maybe I am," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Then why do I see myself in every piece?" There were moments when Nkei almost forgot to be afraid. He could be gentle in unexpected ways, bringing her rare pigments from Italy, leaving her small notes with phrases that felt like poetry. But then something would remind her who he truly was. One evening, she was walking home when she noticed a black car parked across the street. It was the same car that had followed her before, the same one Seo-jun's men used. But this time, she sensed something different. The windows were tinted too darkly. The engine was off. A chill ran through her. The next morning, she found the door to her studio slightly ajar. Nothing seemed stolen, but one of her paintings, a portrait she had recently finished, was gone. On her desk sat a single white envelope. Inside was a photo of her and Seo-jun at the auction, laughing together. On the back, written in red ink, "He's not who you think he is." Her stomach twisted. That evening, she showed Seo-jun the note. He read it calmly, then set it down. "People like to play games when they're afraid," he said. "Afraid of what?" she asked. He looked up at her then, and for the first time, she saw it. Weariness, maybe even regret. "Afraid of what happens when I care about someone." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned away. "You should stay somewhere else for a while," he said. "Somewhere safe." "I'm not running," she said firmly. He looked back at her, his jaw tight. "You don't understand, Nkei. My world doesn't allow weakness. And you," he stopped, his eyes softening just slightly. "You make me weak." That night, Nkei couldn't sleep. The city outside her window pulsed with life, but inside, she felt trapped between two realities, her quiet, honest life as an artist and the dark, glittering world Seo-jun ruled. When she looked at her reflection, she barely recognized herself anymore. There was strength there now, yes, but also danger. The next morning, she arrived at her studio to find police cars outside. Yellow tape. A small crowd gathered. Her heart dropped as she pushed through. One of the officers stopped her. "Are you Miss Nkei?" She nodded. "There was a break-in last night," he said. "We think it was targeted." Inside, her canvases were slashed, her brushes broken, her work destroyed. But one thing remained untouched, a single crimson rose on the table, the same kind Seo-jun had once sent her. Nkei's hands shook as she picked it up. The scent was fresh, recent, and in that moment, she realized the truth. Seo-jun's world wasn't just dangerous, it was beginning to consume hers. Love in his world wasn't safety, it was survival, and she wasn't sure how long she could survive the pull. The morning it happened, Seoul felt unnaturally quiet. A gray sky pressed low against the skyline, and the city moved with a strange, tense stillness. And Kay didn't know that before the day ended, everything about her life would change again. It began with whispers, then phone calls, then chaos. Her phone buzzed nonstop as messages flooded in, journalists, gallery owners, even friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Headlines screamed her name. The Don's muse, Seo-jun Kong, and the artist who stole his heart. Crime and Canvas, the underworld's hidden love affair. And Kay froze as she scrolled through article after article. There, on the screen, were photos, her photos, private moments she thought no one had captured. Shots of her and Seo-jun at the auction, his hand brushing hers, their faces close under dim lights. Another showed them outside her studio, his body angled protectively toward her. And worst of all, one image of Seo-jun standing before one of her paintings, declaring during an elite auction, "This art is not just a masterpiece. It's mine, as she is." The crowd had gasped. Cameras had flashed. And just like that, Kay became property, or so the world believed. Her phone slipped from her hand. Her heart pounded as she whispered to herself, "What have you done, Seo-jun?" By noon, paparazzi camped outside her studio. Gallery partners called in panic, some canceling, others begging for interviews. Her quiet refuge, once filled with nothing but the smell of paint and the hum of creation, became a battlefield of flashing lights and shouted questions. When Seo-jun finally appeared that evening, his usual calm had a dangerous edge. He stepped past the reporters as if they were nothing, his men clearing a path behind him. When he entered her studio, Kay felt the air shift, the scent of rain and tension filling the space. She didn't greet him. She just stared. "You did this," she said, her voice trembling. He met her gaze without flinching. "It was going to happen sooner or later. I just chose the terms." "You chose," she snapped, anger breaking through her fear. "You exposed me. My life is." "Protected," he interrupted. "You don't understand how many eyes were already on you, Kay. People were asking questions. Someone broke into your studio. You were being watched. I couldn't let them use you against me." She stepped closer, her voice sharp. "So, you made me your possession instead?" Seo-jun's eyes darkened.
No.
"I made sure no one could touch you. By destroying my freedom?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched, filled with the soft hum of the city outside. Finally, he said quietly, "You're not safe in the open anymore. Stay with me." And Kay felt her throat tighten. She wanted to scream, to tell him no, to fight back, but part of her couldn't. Part of her still remembered the way he'd looked at her paintings, as if they were pieces of his own soul. The part of her that still, despite everything, wanted to understand the man behind the darkness. "I can't live in your world," she whispered. "Then let me make room for you in it," he replied. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat before a blank canvas, her mind storming. Every thought was tangled between fury and longing. She could still hear his voice, calm and certain, echoing in her mind. The next morning, she began to paint, furious, fast, without thought. Red, black, gold. Strokes that slashed and curved, colors that collided. By evening, her hands were trembling, but the image had taken form. A woman standing in the middle of chaos, half of her body burning, the other half reaching toward light. She titled it Possession. The painting became an overnight phenomenon. Critics called it her best work yet, a raw depiction of love, pain, and transformation. But Kay knew what it really was, her rebellion. Seo-jun visited a week later. He stood in front of the painting, his expression unreadable. "It's you," he said softly. "It's what you made me," she replied. He turned toward her.
No.
"It's what you chose to become." His words struck deep, because maybe in some way he was right. She had changed, not just because of him, but because of everything his world had forced her to face. The fragility of peace. The illusion of control. The price of love. But as the media frenzy grew, danger followed. Rumors swirled that one of Seo-jun's rivals had ordered a hit. Anonymous messages warned her to stay quiet or disappear. One evening, she returned home to find her door ajar again. But this time, it wasn't a rose waiting inside. It was a bullet casing.
She called Seo-jun.
He arrived within 20 minutes, fury burning behind his calm. "They came for you," he said through clenched teeth. "I warned them. I told them." "Who?" she asked. He hesitated. "People who want to see me fall. They think you're my weakness." "Are they wrong?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze, and for the first time, his mask cracked.
Yes.
And no. That night, Seo-jun moved her to his penthouse. high above the city, surrounded by glass and silence. From there, the city lights looked like stars. It should have felt safe. Instead, it felt like a cage made of diamonds. But something shifted in those days. And Kay saw the truth of his world, not just the power and control, but the loneliness that came with it. The constant tension between fear and command. The way he carried invisible battles behind every smooth word. One night, as they stood by the window, she said softly, "You built a kingdom, but it's killing you." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "And you came into my kingdom like a storm." They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The silence between them was heavy enough to feel like gravity. Days later, everything reached its breaking point. Seojun's rival, a man known only as Mr. Han, made his move. A scandal broke, exposing Seojun's criminal dealings. His empire trembled. The police raided properties.
His men scattered.
And In-Kay found herself caught in the storm again, accused of being his accomplice, his lover, his muse of corruption. When she confronted him in the chaos of his half-abandoned office, she demanded, "Was this your plan? To pull me down with you?" He turned toward her, blood on his lip, a small cut on his cheek. "No," he said quietly. "My plan was to keep you alive." She stared at him, the man who had destroyed her peace, yet somehow also awakened her power. "Then let me go," she whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. "If you walk away now, they'll still come after you, but you'll have your name back." "And you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I was never meant to be free." It was the last time she saw him. Months later, the dust settled. The headlines shifted. The dawn vanished, no one knew where. But In-Kay remained. Her art flourished, darker, braver, alive. Every stroke carried echoes of the man who had both ruined and remade her. At her next exhibition, she unveiled a painting titled Redefinition. It showed two figures, one fading into shadow, the other walking toward the light, carrying a single crimson rose. When a journalist asked what it meant, In-Kay simply smiled and said, "It's about love and consequence." Months turned into a year. The city moved on, as it always did, swallowing scandals, rewriting legends, and replacing names that once dominated headlines. But In-Kay still felt his presence, not as a shadow, but as a quiet echo in her mind. Her life was no longer the same, but neither was she. The girl who once hid behind canvases at glittering galas was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by chaos, bolder, sharper, her art now a reflection of her rebirth. Her studio, rebuilt in a quiet part of Seoul, had become a sanctuary once more. The walls were filled with her work, reds like blood, silvers like shattered glass, deep blues that spoke of mourning and memory. Every piece told a fragment of the story she would never fully explain, the story of a kiss that changed everything. One evening, as twilight poured through the windows, In-Kay sat before a new canvas. The city's hum drifted in through the open window, distant but alive. She dipped her brush into crimson paint and paused, her reflection in the glass overlapping with the skyline. For a moment, she saw him there, Seojun, standing behind her, quiet and calm, the faintest hint of that knowing smirk on his lips. "Still haunting me, are you?" she whispered under her breath, a sad smile touching her face. She'd tried to forget him. She'd even tried to hate him. But Seojun wasn't someone you could erase. He had become a part of her story, not as a captor or savior, but as the fire that burned away everything false. When the police had raided his empire, she thought it was the end. Rumors said he'd fled to another country under a false name. Others swore he was dead, taken down by the same men who once bowed to him. But In-Kay knew better. Seojun was not the kind of man who disappeared. He was the kind who transformed. A knock broke her thoughts. Her assistant, Mira, stepped in, holding a sleek black envelope. "This came for you," she said softly, handing it over. "No return address." In-Kay frowned, wiping her hands on a rag before taking it. The seal was pressed with a small symbol, a single rose carved into black wax. Her heart skipped. She opened it carefully. Inside was a folded note, the paper thick and expensive. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, precise, elegant. I once told you that love in my world is dangerous. You proved me wrong. It was never the danger that destroyed me. It was the absence of you. Your fire still burns in every shadow I walk through. Don't stop painting. The world needs to see what we were, what you became.
S.
NK's fingers trembled slightly as she read the last line. No address. No signature beyond that single letter. But it was enough. Mira noticed her expression. Is everything okay? NK folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. Yes, she said, her voice softer than usual. Everything's fine. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony, looking down at the glittering expanse of Seoul. Somewhere out there, maybe across an ocean, Seo-jun was still alive, still watching. She could almost hear his voice. Calm, teasing, dangerous, but warm in the way only he could be. And somehow, instead of fear, NK felt peace. She turned back to her canvas. The painting she'd begun earlier called to her. This one felt different. Not dark like the others, not soaked in grief or defiance. This one carried light. She began to paint again, slow, deliberate strokes. The image unfolded like memory, a single figure standing before a sea of red and gold, her eyes steady, her expression fierce. The horizon behind her blazed with fire, but she didn't run from it. She walked through it, carrying something unseen. Perhaps love, perhaps pain, perhaps both. When she finished, NK stepped back and whispered, For you, Seo-jun. The painting was titled The Echo of Fire. Months later, it hung in a Paris exhibition, her first international showcase. Critics praised it as her most profound piece, calling it a love story painted in flame. No one knew who inspired it. Only she did. And yet, the story didn't end there. A year later, in a small gallery in Italy, a mysterious collector purchased The Echo of Fire for an astronomical sum. The buyer left no name, just a note left for the curator. Tell her the fire still burns. When NK received word of it, she only smiled. That quiet, knowing smile that carried both heartbreak and gratitude. She no longer needed to see him to know he was out there. Their connection had transcended distance, power, and time. It lived in her art, in the air she breathed, in the pulse of her heart when she painted. That was their legacy, not the chaos, not the claim, but the transformation they had forged together. Years later, when NK became